He is an author, an economic development expert, a one-time villager, and an unconventional adventurer. We'll focus mostly on his time at Grove and Bedford while he was attending the New School and Parsons School of Design in the 70s. He's also the author of an upcoming novel, which we're hoping to have a book talk. So we'll talk about it briefly, but his upcoming novel is about to launch. So stay tuned for that, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And he is, of course, the executive director of the Queens Economic Development Council, a native New Yorker, a great traveler. The novel that's coming is called Swimming to Jerusalem, and part of it takes place on Grove Street. He first joined the Queens Economic Development Corporation, sorry, I said council, Seth, Corporation, QEDC, as we know it here in Queens, in 1979, where he helped coordinate the borough's first commercial revitalization programs, which led to the founding of many local development corporations and business improvement districts. He's been the executive director since 2009, has really transformed the organization, and I can say that from the ground here in Queens. Notably, this included opening the entrepreneur space, a commercial kitchen business incubator in Long Island, the Made in Queens MIQ program. I have a bunch of products with that logo on it. And their product specialized programs for immigrant, minority-owned businesses, low-income entrepreneurs, and the expansion of Queens tourism. As an artist in Queens, I love that too. And has served as the director of economic development for the Office of the Queens Borough President for 2 administrations. So, but we're gonna not focus, although we could talk all day about Queens, Seth and I, we're gonna focus on the village today. Welcome, Seth. Thank you for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Leanne. It's really fun to be here, and my first time doing one of these. So if I ramble on too much, I'll cut me off. Probably, okay?
No problem, no problem. So what we start with are a few questions that I ask everybody that we do these kinds of interviews with, and then we'll get into kind of your personal history some more. But how would you describe your connection with Greenwich Village?
And my connection, I'm a native New Yorker, born in Brooklyn, children of first generation. My grandparents were immigrants. My parents got in Brooklyn. I was born there in '56. And like a lot of people, they moved out to the suburbs, South Shore of Long Island, Wantagh. And but they were city people, my folks. Loved going back into the city. Early on, when we moved out to Long Island, there was nothing was out there. Restaurants, where to go shopping. So going into the city, Brooklyn, Manhattan was important to them, and they would take us with them. It wasn't a scary place in their mind. And they grew up there. My cousins were there, grandparents were there, and a couple of very early city memories. One is my grandparents and uncle on my mother's side. They traveled to the Caribbean or Europe, and in those days, all the ships were docked on the west side, off the West Side Highway, and they had bon voyage parties. And I have vague memories. I was 5, 6 years old, going to these big ships. They're huge. I'm a 5-year-old, they're very big. Going to these ships, going on board, the captain taking me on a little tour of the model of the ship. And it was so exciting. But it got me excited about travel. And I always loved, I love traveling. And I remember when I was at 8 or 9, my dad showed me the New York Times, the shipping report every day, shipping news. There was a list of ships that came in from all over the world, where they were going. And I always look at that, fascinated, ship going to Zanzibar or Tokyo, whatever. So it got my love for travel. I couldn't travel, so I was older, of course, but this idea of the whole world is out there, which began at a dock in Manhattan. And then the other thing was, we used to go for family dinners in the city, extended family dinners, and we were not exactly highbrow gourmets, but we went to a restaurant. It was not in the village, but close by on Delancey Street, called the French Romanian. And it was, I don't know who remembers it, but it was probably an upscale delicatessen on Delancey Street. But it had crystals and mirrors, and I thought, this is where the elegant rich people go. And it was always exciting to go there. My grandparents would take us there with the cousins, or else at Ratner's for onion rolls, or another place called Rappaport's on 2nd Avenue. But that was our food experience. And the village, though, the one early first memory I had was my parents loved theater. And when I was about 5 or 6, I saw my first show, The Fantastics, on Sullivan Street. I remember my dad taking me there. It must have been my sister, who'd just been born at 59. She was born, and they, I was ignored. It was the little baby. They took me out. My dad took me in a day, went to the city, and went to the show. And I vaguely remember the show and being there. It's so exciting to be in the city, and I just loved the urban environment. We went for dinner afterward. I don't remember the restaurant, but it was your typical red sauce Italian place. Red checkered tablecloths, a bottle with a candle in it somewhere in the village. My dad and myself was probably 5 or 6, and I think I had spaghetti, which is really exotic, for someone like who grew up with basically not Jewish American cuisine. Spaghetti was the biggest thing in the world. Exciting. So those are really memories. The smells, smell brings back memory. And this is weird, but my favorite smell as a kid was the combination of roasted chestnuts and bus exhaust. That smell, urban smell when you're in the middle of the city in the winter and it's steamy, cold out, and the steam is coming out. You smell chestnuts and the bus is there. And we used to go and visit Christmas. We went to see the Rockefeller Center tree. And when I was young, I always thought, oh, that's the tree for Jewish people, because why would you go visit a tree if I one at home? It made no sense. So we used to go visit the tree and, of course, go to either that little town place downtown or Chinatown for dinner afterward. That was my experience. But I always loved the city. Growing up, during high school, we were adventurous, my friends and I. Would take the train in, or a couple of times my friend Cliff, he owned a 59 Pontiac, it's like 20 feet long, I think. We'd drive into the city, just wander around the village, Washington Square, probably try to do some nefarious activities in Washington Square as the kids, teenagers. But it was just exciting to be there. And I just knew I wanted to live here. I wasn't sure how, why, or what, but I wanted to be here. So those 3 things shaped me: the food, travel, and theater. And in later life, I did travel a lot. I'm still traveling, hopefully. And theater, I wrote plays. I'll talk about that a little later. Started out in Village. But that's my connection to Greenwich Village early on in the city. It wasn't until I was in college that it really became a reality for me.
That's beautiful. And it's so funny because the speaker we had on Wednesday met his wife at the Fantastics Theater. Not during it was like a either Monday when the theater was closed or something. So definitely a hub for a lot of good memories.
Right.
Well, that's fascinating. And I can relate because I know, we're big Queens people. We may never leave, but if something comes available on Minetta Lane, we might. That's been the dream of mine since I was young. So let's talk about a little bit about your time in the community of Greenwich Village and how that kind of shaped your life and work. Because it wasn't when you were little. Obviously it shaped you just being there and being around it, like so many of us, but then you actually got to live the dream and live there.
I did. At the time, it was just sort of happened. It fell into place. In high school, I went to a decent high school. I made friends on this chat who went to the same high school as me. It was okay. It was a middle-class community in South Shore. It was not Great Neck or Scarsdale or, didn't turn out kids who went to Harvard. A couple of kids did, but not many. But I was in the school paper in 73, I guess. And my friend Henry and I went to a school newspaper conference, in the Northeast Conference of School Papers. And Henry was a great writer. I thought it was pretty good, but Henry was great. They awarded all the papers prizes. And our paper came in first prize in the competition. And it turns out we were against the other group, the other school that was in the competition was Deerfield Academy, whose editor was Chip Cronkite, son of Walter. So the scrappy lower middle class South Shore Long Island kids in their t-shirts and jeans won against the preppies and the blue blazers and rough ties. It was very exciting. But at that conference, we were asked to take a scholarship test, and Henry came in first. I came in second. He bailed and went to Georgetown because he was brilliant. I had a full ride scholarship at Syracuse University. So I was thinking at that point before that I'd apply to NYU because I really wanted to be in the city. At that point in the mid-70s, and I was discouraged by everybody about going to school in Manhattan. It was dangerous. It was terrible. It was unsafe. School wasn't that good. NYU wasn't considered school in. But I got a scholarship at Syracuse, so I had no brainer. But at Syracuse, it was a really bad match for me. I spent a year in the snow wondering what I'm doing up here in this godforsaken town that's cold and dreary, and I didn't connect to anybody or anything. And it was a rough year. So I came back in that May and I told my parents dropping out of college. Telling your middle-class Jewish folks you're leaving college, if I had said it was a drug dealing murderer, it would have the same effect. The only thing was they were at that point, they were going through a really nasty divorce. It was so crazy with craziness. My life was not a big part of their life then. And my grandmother passed away a few months before and left me $10,000 only to be used for education purposes, not anything else. So I didn't want to go back to Syracuse. End of the summer of 75, I guess it was, I started had to pay for Parsons School of Design art school. Now remember, I never took any art classes. I was never an artist. I thought this was cool. I could live in the village, go to art school. I called them up, any places left. End of August, school starts in about 4 days. And they said, you need a financial aid. I said, no, I was in. This is the now, for Parsons, I understand, is hard to get into, very selective. Really was very easy to get into in 1975 when you had the money to pay for it. And it wasn't expensive, about $2,000 for tuition. I had the money. And I entered Parsons September 1975. And it was another world. Here I was, a kid from a middle-class background, kind of a nice suburban area, but going to school. So I get into class first, exotic people in my mind. I mean, there were all these women from all over the class, some very wealthy women dressed expensively, guys from all over. And it was a village, and it was just beginning, the gay movement at that point was going out. So there were guys dressed in leather. I had no clue what this was all about, and it was kind of interesting. And I met a great crowd of people. I was in the environmental design department, which is very small. In those days, it basically meant design something, products or urban design. It was very vague of what it was, which was great. And I really liked urban design. So I'll study urban design program. Really was sort of do what you want, basically, just turn in something. So it was the 40 of us in the class. And it wasn't about house in Germany, but it was that sense of working together with other people. And we worked in teams. And that was really exciting to me because you were assigned a team to do a project, individual ones too, but develop a project. And my favorite, we had to design multi-unit housing, and one of my classmates designed housing made of pasta. Made no sense at all. Designer, but it was just silly things. And our teachers were all out there. And it's interesting because it was such a, now that we have all the terms of gender and transsexual, but then it was like everybody was, it was everything. There was no men's room or women's room on the floor, it was like everything was everybody, it was no big deal. And this is 1975. And I met great people and I got an education. I mean, there were many people more sophisticated than me at the school. And I had a great friend there, John Warner. He grew up in Manhattan. He was cool. I remember, we became friendly. We sat at the same table. And at one point, I said, Seth, I was wearing these polyester waffle weave pants, because Seth, never wear those again in the city. You can't wear those. So I learned how to dress. Black is good. I'm wearing black now. So I learned a lot and met people. So that was my first experience in the village. And I wanted to live there. I couldn't afford it. So I crashed with people who were living in the city, other classmates. I ended up getting an apartment on the Upper West Side, Riverside Drive in 93rd Street with a couple of other friends who were going to school, one at Parsons, one at Juilliard. And in those days, you could find apartments. They couldn't give away those big apartments at Riverside Drive. We had a choice of 3 and 4 bedroom apartments for like $500, $400 a month, overlooking the river. And we took one, so I commuted. I moved to the Lower East Side to 2nd Street and 3rd Street. And that was really interesting because the Lower East Side then was pretty scuzzy and rough. Avenue A, Avenue B, where you went there to buy drugs, basically, and that was it. 3rd Street between 2nd and 1st, I saw heaven and hell, because in one corner was Hell's Angels on 3rd and 1st. In the following corner was the office of Dorothy Day, the Catholic worker movement. I didn't know this, but I'd walk back from school in the afternoons, and in front of the Catholic worker was this beatific. The beatific woman in a wheelchair who sat there, smiled at people, and it was Dorothy Day sitting there in the afternoon, looking at you, smiling, and then you walk further down the block and there's Hell's Angels, and people say, "Oh, it'll keep the block safe." These guys are drunk all the time. They didn't do, yeah, you watched out for them. But it was the East Village, and it was wild and scary. And And the city in the 70s, as I'm sure many of you guys have noted, people say how bad the city's getting today, and not even close. Um, it was probably as close as we come to Weimar Germany in terms of decadence and scariness, New York, from my perspective. But there were wonderful things about it. We used to go get our blueprints made at a Union Square, or where Barnes and Noble is now. There was a blueprint facility. You used to do drawings, you go over there. And the guy that worked there, the guy owned it was kind of a schmuck, but he had a young worker who was really a nice young guy. He may have been an immigrant from Latin America, didn't speak English well, but a really nice kid. He would always help me. I didn't know his name, but one of my greatest New York stories is it was around Christmas, and I was at a party on the west side, had to walk back to the east side, and it was so cold out. And in those days, you didn't walk through Union Square during the day, let alone at night, because it was really dangerous. I knew I could save maybe 5 minutes. It was like 4 degrees if I go through Union Square. Come across Union Square, and I see 3 guys approaching me. It's at 2 a.m., all in hoodies. I'm going to get rolled. I know it's happening. I got to just go with it. Plus, one of the guys goes, "What the hell are you doing here?" It was the guy that worked in the blueprint shop. He goes, "You shouldn't be walking around here late at night like this. It's dangerous. You're a short little guy." And he insisted on taking me home. So I was escorted home by 3 guys who may have mugged someone else, but they took me back to First Street. Said, don't let yourself get 6 around. I got to get it. It was really funny. But it was that wonderful feeling. The West Village in Grove Street, this is where it began. My friend John Parsons, he was wealthier than most of us. He may have had a little trust fund. And he called me one day at lunch. He said, "I found this farm on Bedford Street. I wanted to look at it with me. I may take it." It was $300 a month, which was a fortune because nobody I knew was paying more than maybe $150 for an apartment or a share. And it was Twin Peaks, the building on Bedford between Christopher and Grove on the north side. There's a building like Swiss Chalet, the top 4 apartment. I walked in there, it was like a barn in Vermont. And I remember, "John, you got to take this. This is incredible." And he did. It became the clubhouse for us in Parsons. We used to go there, and in art school, when your project, before it's due, there's what's called the charrette, working all night to get your project ready. And John's place was the place you'd go to do a charrette. Always a lot of food, a lot of stuff to drink, a lot of stuff to keep you awake. It was a lot of fun. But it looked out onto Grove Street. And I remember looking out from his apartment and seeing 18 Grove and the row of houses on that street, thinking, this is such a beautiful area. And that was great. I graduated Parsons, and in I guess it was 1980, a friend of mine, everybody in New York has a how I got my apartment story. Mine's, we have some time. I'll give the longest version because it's funny. 1960, when I was 4 years old, there was a young woman called Marika who was traveling across country with Robert Frank, the photographer, stops at the farm in Tennessee. Tells a woman who's living at the farm, "Claire, oh, my mother has a house in the village. If you need an apartment, go there. I can maybe help you get the apartment." So Claire moved into the apartment on Grove Street. Fast forward to 1980 or so, and I was sitting with my friend Alan having dinner, and his friend Eileen is a friend of Mignon, who's a friend of Claire, who said, "Oh, the studio apartment on the top of my floor of my building is available. It's $450 a month." I was paying $200 a month somewhere else, $250 up down. But she said, "It's great." So I gave me the number of the landlady, and I called her the next day, Catherine Maldonado. Catherine was in her 70s then, wonderful Southern lady, born in Mississippi, though her family's from Virginia. Real class, gracious, elegant, soft-spoken. She shows me the apartment on the top floor. It was a studio it was smaller than the room I'm in now, my living room here in Manhattan. It was a small studio with a separate kitchen, but it was a corner apartment, so the windows on 2 sides, which is rare in a brownstone, and a fireplace that worked. Never clean, but she said, "Don't set a fire. Don't make the fire go too high." She said somebody else is interested in the apartment, but she always liked to meet someone just in case the first one fell through. But she was pretty sure the first person wanted it. I loved this apartment. It was every cliche of a village Barrett. Ran down the street, found a payphone. Remember those? Called my dad, said, if I get $80,000 a month rent, month security, I can't let this go. He was like, all right, let me come look at it. Get a call the next day from Kat saying, I'd like you to take the apartment. It was really nice when I was surprised. I found out later on the other person who wanted it was in finance. And when she spoke to him and told him the price, he said, oh, I can pay whatever you want, 400, 500. And she immediately decided, I don't want that person in my, someone knows the value of nothing except money is not someone I want to live in my building. And when I told her I got to Parsons, she'd gone to art school. I wrote, I said I was writing plays, then not anything published. She wrote, and we were simpatico. So I took the apartment and moved down on the subway. Literally, I had friends. We moved down on the subway. And it took like a couple of days to get down there. It was a great little apartment, a great studio. And I moved in and I was in the village, living in my own studio in the West Village. And the building was covered with ivy, which is terrible for bricks, but really charming to look at. Catherine was she was a Bohemian, and her story is a real village story. Like I said, she was born in the South, Mississippi. Her father, I believe, was the youngest son of the family, so he didn't inherit the estate. It turns out the estate in Virginia was either designed or influenced by Thomas Jefferson in the late 1700s. It was called Remo. And she would tell me about it over the years. And she always said, some people would say it's a beautiful home in America. That accent I can't do, but she always says beautiful home in America. And I roll my eyes. I'll go back to that later because it is it. But she came from New York in the 20s, went to art school, then went to Paris to study arts in 1925. There she went to the 1928 Olympics, met a gentleman from Argentina on the ski team who she married, went back to Argentina. She married into one of the most wealthiest families in Argentina, in Cordoba, which is a small city in the north part of Argentina, I believe. She was the American wife of this glamorous, sophisticated, she was from a glamorous family in the States, but Argentinian wealth is the same as rich as Argentine, and they were that wealthy. And she lived there for many years, had 3 children with him. And if you've ever seen the movie The Motorcycle Diaries, Che Guevara is dating a young woman from a wealthy family. That was her niece. And she would mention how when Che was a young child, she'd babysit for Che. And his parents were lovely, but not very good parenting skills. Maybe that's why Che turned out the way he did. And her family, though, her Argentinian side, she became connected to them and very active in culture down there, a very high society. Moved back to New York in the 1950s, divorced her husband, met another gentleman, came back to New York City, early 50s, took an apartment on Barrow Street. She had a young son then, a son with a second husband, who was born in the early 50s. He was 50 years older than me, so born probably 51, 52. They lived in Barrow Street, I believe, in a rental, and then 18 Grove Street came up on the market. 18 Grove was, and I did some research in anticipation of this, there's a whole similar story about it, turns out. It was the house where Grove Street Press was founded in the 1940s. So it was really historical. Built as a one-family house. By the time she bought it, it would be owned by a number of families. I'm told, Alana and I think she bought it from a Mexican painter who left most of the furniture in the apartment for her. Because she had this extraordinary dining table and it was really elegant. I probably couldn't get out of the room, so that's why I was left there. And she used the top 2 floors as her apartment, duplex. Apartment to the ground floor when you walk down in the English parlor floor, and then the main parlor floor. When her son moved out and she divorced, she was single, so she just took the top floor, made it into a studio, which rented to me, and she kept the room behind as a guest room. So it was 5 units in the building. I was there in 1980. I moved in, and there was a sense of, and I moved to the prior renter of the apartment was a gentleman, Nicholas Schaffner, who had just written the book, The Complete Beatles. It was a bestseller, and the authority book on the Beatles. So the building had a sort of literary history, which I like. Nicholas is a really charming guy. He bought a house, I believe, on Grove Court. He made money from the book and bought a house on Grove Court, right in the middle of the street, off the street. It's a beautiful little enclave of houses. And I wasn't friendly with him, but I'd seen him around. Nice guy. Unfortunately, he died of AIDS early on, the early 1980s, and I thought about that a bit too, because it was things we didn't know what was happening, but it was happening. But Catherine she was always having a salon in her apartment. I went to sign the lease. My dad came in to sign the lease, and she introduced me to this exotic woman that was Viva of Andy Warhol's fame. She was this like all these characters come in from Argentina for writing group. She was friendly with writers and poets. A close friend was Denise Levertov, who was a great poet. Grace Kelly was there sometimes. And Catherine would tell stories about, living in Paris, and talked about being in Paris when Lindbergh landed. I'm not sure if I remember correctly, but she may have referenced being at a party with Scott and Zelda. Oh, I'm not entirely sure if that's true or not. And I think she may have said Zelda drank a lot. So I mean, but it wasn't a name dropping. It was that's the world she was in. So it was exciting to be around her. And whenever I come in late at night, she'd still be awake. And Seth, come in, help me open a bottle of wine, and bring wine with her. She was land rich and cash poor because she bought this place. Like I said, she paid maybe $18,000. It was probably worth about 15, she said, but she really wanted it badly. So she borrowed money from her dad to buy it. But she wasn't wealthy. Her income was the small pension, Social Security, and the rent from the tenants. The maintenance of this house was extraordinary. It was falling apart. We used to joke that Mr. Petty, the plumber, or Petty Plumber, I don't know if they're still there, they basically replumbed everything. They must have bought a house in France and the money she spent on them doing work. And so we came in one night and there was a sign, don't worry, the smell is a dead rat. We'll try to get rid of it pretty soon. It was that kind of thing. But it was exciting to be there. And the literary thing was very exciting to me. So I came down one night, and the sense of she wasn't of wealth, but she was just so interested in the world and people. But she wasn't a great manager of the building. I'm there about 3 months. It's winter. It's cold in my apartment. I go downstairs. I just got to raise the heat. And I'm a little annoyed. It's like 50 degrees in the apartment. It's really chilly. And she opens the door wearing like old mink coat, like the ratty mink coat and a hat and a scarf. She's cold too. How can I say raise? So we ended up talking and chatting, and the evening ended after some wine. I wrote her a check to help pay the utility bill and help Trinity Church down the block at a fire. And she was on the committee to restore it, so you'd buy a brick. So another check to buy like 10 bricks. I walked back upstairs afterward. I realized I just went downstairs to complain about the heat. Here I was, still cold, and at $400. Paying for utilities and paying bricks for Trinity Church. As a Jewish kid from Flatbush, I have more money invested in bricks in Trinity Church than anybody else, I think. It was really fun. But speaking, every Southern writer came to the South knew Catherine Maldonado, which was like not a flop house, but a way station to drop. So the writers she knew, Peter Taylor from Virginia. But my favorite is I'm walking home one after. She knew I was right. I wrote some plays that were done when I was living there. I'm walking home one afternoon in the spring, and she's on the step going downstairs with this tall, distinguished man with white hair. And I get up there. She looks at me, oh, Seth, I want you to meet Bill. Bill, Seth's a writer too. It was William Styron. So for about 1 nanosecond, Bill and I were in the same league as writers. It was very exciting. I don't think he ever remembered that story, but I always do. I've always meant to share that. I never met, but I was at an event where his daughter Alexandra was at, and I wanted to share that, but I didn't get a chance to. But it made my day. And still, 40 years later, I'm still excited to tell that story. It was so exciting. Down the block from us was Calvin Trillin, Calvin and Alice Trillin. And we weren't friendly. We, said hi to them, and Catherine knew them. There were other people from the block. And the thing that made it a neighborhood, obviously it's a village, there was people like me, renters, there were wealthy people who owned townhouses. But I didn't get a sense then, at least, it wasn't what it was now, the hedge fund wealthy who sent $1 zillion to make beautiful apartments. It was people who were doing things, and people took care of each other. There was a man, not young, he was probably older than me, than Larry, who lived on Bedford Street. He was mentally disabled. Something he could live by himself, but clearly he needed care and watched over. But he lived by himself, and the neighborhood watched out for him, and it was exciting to. It was exciting to, not exciting, but it was heartwarming to know he was cared for, even though he lived alone. Um, we had a superintendent, Ozzy, who he supered for a number of buildings. He was an artist, musician, some sort. Early 80s, he contracted something. No one knew what it was. And obviously it was AIDS, but no one seemed to talk about it. And Catherine, she wasn't in a position to care for him, but she really helped him out. And when he passed, she organized a memorial service at St. Luke's. She wanted to, he wasn't religious, but she wanted to have a final memorial, and the whole neighborhood showed up. It was really touching. We and it was neighborhood on Bleecker Street around the corner were all the shops. Now you go down there, and again, I'm not going to be those guys as always like that, but it was more of a day-to-day neighborhood because on Bleecker between Grove and 7th Avenue, we had A&P and Ricci's. We had Blumstein's Hardware and Paint Store. If they didn't have it, it didn't exist basically anywhere in the world. There's a joke: you live below 14th Street, you don't go above 14th. Nothing doesn't matter. When you live in the West Village, you don't go east at 6th Avenue because nothing wasn't available in your neighborhood. It exists. There was Lafayette Bakery, which you know people may love it. I think it's the worst bakery in the world. But the guy on it was so charming. There was a big sign that said "Bake with butter," and Catherine once said, "I'm from the South. We know what lard is. It's baked with lard. I assure you." He said croissants were like pale and not very flaky, but they were close by. And there were a couple of Chinese restaurants. On Hudson Street, there was Cafe Shasha, Cafe Maurizio, was owned by a big guy named Maurizio, had a beard, Italian guy with a motorcycle, and Hudson Diner. But there was neighborhood shops and stores. And of course, right across from us is Chumley's, the original Chumley's at the back door, which we went to fairly regularly. I went there before I met Diane, and after I went there a lot with Catherine. And it was fun because some nights when I lived together, and it was Chumley's was well known. It wasn't a scene like some places are today, but I'd love to go there on a snowy night because not far from where we live was the police horse stable for the police, not the police, somewhere in the West Village. Now, snowy nights, if you'd walk around, you hear the horses clomping on the snow and no cars because nobody's driving, and you close your eyes and it could be 1865. There was a sense of like, this is what it sounded like 100 years ago in the village. And I loved going to Chumley's, going out the back door, which they renovated a number of years ago, reopened. I went there with friends. There was, $25 hamburgers. You're like, what is this? But it was our place to go to. And Pink Teacup, the jazz bar that opened up for African American musicians back in the 20s when they couldn't go anywhere else. That was the breakfast place. And the little bakeries, little shops, they're all wonderful places to go to, and we knew each other, a sense of community, which segued into my job in Queens. I was director of neighborhood development first, and developing a neighborhood is really important and getting to know your neighbors. One thing people don't live in New York City, anywhere, Queens, Greenwich Village, or Jackson, don't understand sometimes. They look at this big, messy city, all micro neighborhoods, no matter where you are. Right now, I live uptown. It looks like a very anonymous area. I have my Irish pub across the street, my dry cleaner, the coffee shop, the barber. We all know each other. And this became very apparent during COVID. It really was a sense of community. And that's why my career is I love my career in urban development. And I never did it in Manhattan. I do it in Queens. The lessons I learned about living in the community that was so important, the interactions were really important. It's changed a lot, but the world changes. And Catherine, I remember she would say, nostalgia isn't so fast, such a great thing. It wasn't that great anyway. So embrace the future. So whenever Diane and I, oh, it should have been like, remember this, we have to be careful. Catherine would not like that. So we do remember that. We stayed there. We got married in 1987. Met Diane on a trip to Russia in 1983 on a bus, the last gasp of the Soviet Empire. We came back. She was living in Brooklyn, Nebraska. I think the last thing she ever thought about was meeting a Jewish guy from Brooklyn in New York City and marrying him. It was not probably not her consciousness, but she did. And we married 87, came back to our studio apartment. It was nice, but we needed a bigger space. It was only one room. So we ended up moving uptown, modern apartment. The day we moved in, I said, man, we made a terrible mistake. I hate this place. I hate it. And we were there 6 months. Catherine called us and said, she was sad that we were leaving. The parlor floor is becoming empty. Or she said anything else, I said, we're taking it. Whatever it is, we're moving in. We moved in a month later. We got rid of the apartment uptown. We're back to Grove Street and had the whole parlor floor. And that was exciting because there's this huge living room, nice kitchen, appliances from like 1923 or something, ancient appliances, but a backyard, a garden. We had that garden on Grove Street. And it wasn't a fancy, fussy garden, but we had tables and chairs. And we had great parties out there. We had my 30th birthday, I think, with other parties there. We really enjoyed it and enjoyed being there. Diane worked for a time for the United Nations. She worked there for her career, but it's talked earlier. On her first day working for the UN, she's a little late, rushing down to get to her job the first day. Catherine opens the door in the morning, wearing this beautiful, Benoit type of thing. Okay, where are you going? To the job. I've got to start. I'll come with a cup of coffee. And there goes, I have my first job, my first day. She said, oh, they won't mind. The omnipresent, she was like, oh, they won't mind. They're all like, of course, you a cup of coffee with Catherine. And now it's Catherine's MO, like, oh, it doesn't matter. We live for the moment. We enjoy ourselves. It was great. In 1989, the end of the year, Diane got pregnant. And it wasn't a big grand plan on our part. And we get a big apartment, and we thought we could do this with a baby. We could live in the city, and we could figure this out. A month into a pregnancy, I went with her to the first obstetrician visit, and he looked at her and said, there are two of them. And we weren't sure what he meant about that. And then all of a sudden, twins. So this is a cold November day. We walked from 85th Street, New York, back to the village. And all we did was look at each other and say, twins. We weren't really planning kids, let alone two of them at once. Get back to the apartment, and I see Catherine, and I go, just how'd it go? I said, you're getting two more tenants. And it was like, oh, but then they were born in May of 1990. And, going from a single guy in a studio, carefree, to a dad and a mom with two kids in an apartment, was really hard. We had our daughters now, they're 32 and they're great, but they were 2 months old. They were a handful, and they loved to stay up late at night. That was it. They were night birds in the village. Let's go to bed. So I would walk them around the village at 2 a.m. to Hudson Diner. The cops knew me. That's a nutcase of the twin trying to calm the baby. They would be home calming the other baby. And they were great kids, but we knew we couldn't stay there. It was hard to get them outside. Was a major production, no elevator. So I'd run downstairs with the carriage, bring one baby down, run back upstairs. They all come down. We couldn't leave them along the street. We had some wonderful moments from them. We took them. The first parade was the Gay Pride Parade in 1990. We walked Sheridan Square. We sat on we didn't have a stoop. We sat in front of the steps of Grove Street every afternoon. Calvin Triller would walk by with his wife and say, the famous twins of Grove Street. And he said to me something which he wrote later on. He goes, I have two daughters, and he's from Kansas originally. And he wrote this, I tell my daughters they're being raised in Kansas, not in Greenwich Village, giving them that sense of morality. And he gave that advice to us, and I always loved that. we we love living there with the girls. Laundry, we got a washer and dryer for the basement that always broke down. So we ended up going to laundry on Bedford Street. But having twins in Greenwich Village 1990 was a challenge. So we did have to move out, and we ended up moving out west to Omaha, Nebraska, where Dan's from. And it was a great move. We had extended family, friends. We loved them, but the village was always like the girls were born at St. Vincent Hospital. They went to labor. I woke up, we woke up and she said, not gonna happen today. So I get the subway, I had a meeting at LaGuardia Airport, subway to a bus. I get to LaGuardia, 30 people there saying, turn around and go back home. Your wife is in labor. This is before cell phone. So my colleague, Joyce Coward, a wonderful woman, got me from LaGuardia to St. Vincent's about 15 minutes, I think. And the girls were born a rainy morning, but a beautiful sunny afternoon. And they were born in Greenwich Village. And I always think that's a thing to say. It gives them a sort of quality, I think. But we loved having them there and being part of that community. And Catherine really doted on them. There was a moment too, going back to Che Guevara, there was a moment where we had to take Madeline to the doctor for something, she had a rash. And needed a babysitter last minute. I called Catherine. It was at that point, she was 87 years old, I think, and not exactly ready to babysit, but I said, can you watch Madeline for Carrie for an hour? So she did. So I always tell Carrie, the same woman that babysat Che Guevara babysat you, which is the next thing to say. But it was one of the happiest times of my life. Diane loved living there. We were so sad to leave. But what we did, we'd come back to New York every summer. We'd stay with our friend Dore on the street. One summer, Catherine was away for for about a month, and she said, stay in her apartment. So we got to stay there again. In I guess it was like 1995 or 96. We spent 3 weeks there in Grove Street, and all our friends came over, visited, we had parties there, used the garden. And our friend Alana, who lived in the apartment next door, her mom helped out. We had all these helpers. Our friends came and babysat for us. Diane's mom came in. When the girls were born, Diane's mother came in to visit, help us. We needed help. And she went to Lafayette Bakery and got food poisoning. So we knew, she had an almond croissant that he gave her the run. It was terrible. So she was sick. Dan was exhausted. I had two screaming babies. But it proved to me we could do this. We can manage. We can take care of kids. And we did. It was a turning point. But it was great and I loved it. And the area's changed. The house, Catherine died in 2003. She was 97. We saw her a month before, and she walked up and down the steps till a week or two before she died, and she always had her sip of wine and Coca-Cola because she wanted Coca-Cola. I'm told Coca-Cola to bring her back from the dead. So she would drink Coca-Cola and wine. But the last month she was fading. You could tell she never wanted to leave that house. Over the years, as she got older, her family got to move out. Her daughter lived with her. Her friends didn't. She ended up passing away in 2003, and her children, she had 4 children, and none of them lived in the city, and they sold the house as is, and it was bought, and I just read articles about it, and it's been renovated. The outside, they redid it the way it originally was. Very pretty, of course, but it was a little too cutesy, too pretty. And the interior, I saw the pictures, nothing, it's a one family now. The one thing struck me in the pictures was there was not one book in any of the pictures. And in Catherine's apartment, in my apartment, in Lana's apartment, crammed with books, or maybe not very good artwork, maybe not great books, but it was a place for people to sit and schmooze. And in the picture I saw of it now was a place to take pictures of and not really live in. So that's what people want. And I remember Catherine said, this is the future, what it is, embrace it. But I'll end my little talk, I guess, to paraphrase Hemingway, who said, live in Paris as a young man, it always stays with you. Live in the West Village as a young man, it always stayed with me and it always will. So that's my spiel.
That was fascinating, and I love every moment of it. And if anyone has any questions for Seth, please feel free to put those in, but you've covered so much. But I don't want to leave without talking about your book. And as I said, we'll want to do a full book talk, but can you give us a little bit of a
Sure.
preview and a little bit about what's going on with your book?
Okay, Swimming to Jerusalem is a novel I started during the pandemic when we all had a lot of time on hands, and I was recovering from surgery, couldn't go outside. So I wrote plays many years ago. 3 of them produced, 2 in the Village, 113th Street, and some place in Tribeca, which doesn't exist anymore. But over the pandemic, I was talking about a novel. I had ideas in my mind and wasn't sure what it would be. And I had a writing teacher in 12th grade. Mrs. Rosen. Those of you who want to chat from Wanda High, remember John Rosen, who once said to me, the characters will tell you what they want to do. And that was so right. All of a sudden, they became real and I loved them. And so I finished it earlier last year, and it's being published in the fall. And then later this spring, it's in final proof. It's a contemporary fiction about a family, young man who, when he was a teenager, was on top of the world, thought he was Mr. King of everything, and he realizes soon afterward the world is a terrible place, and he's no confidence. He meets a young woman in Paris as he's busking on the Boulevard Saint-Germain. He has no plan. She does. They move back to New York to her apartment on Grove Street, had a model somewhere, and they move into Grove Street, and they begin their life together, and then they children and move to Forest Hills. I know about that too. It's not autobiographical. The elements of my life, of course, but it's not my story. And story of a family and the past and the present, and how I reconcile hardships of the past and go forward in a positive way. So I'm really excited about it. It's sad. It's very funny. There are parts of it that I think are hysterical. I do. Maybe someone else won't. I know when I showed it to, the first person I showed it to was my wife, Diane, who was my best critic. And the first thing she said, it's good. But then she said all these things that had to be fixed. And almost every single one of them I fixed. And other people read it too. So I'm really excited about it. I have a blog, which I'll put online in about a month or so. And hopefully it'll be sold online, Amazon, Bookshop, hopefully placed in local bookstores. I know we chatted maybe 3 Lives of Company in the Village, which I love. And in fact, I have here Catherine Maldonado, my landlady. She wrote a book called The Malvern Stories of Her Life, and it was sold with 3 Lives of Company. She did a reading of it at the Cornelia Street Cafe years ago. And it was good for her because she always wanted to write too, and she finally wrote this memoir. And it's a beautiful memoir of growing up in the South and coming to New York. So I'm excited about my book, and I look forward to hopefully doing a book reading with you, and people hope they like it as much as I like writing it.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to read it, and we'll definitely share with everyone who registered your blog and the information. And we'll also, if you're watching this on YouTube, it will be in the description below. So, Seth, I can't thank you enough for your generosity of spirit, all you do for our community, but also just sharing this wonderful afternoon with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leanne.
You're welcome. Okay, well, here's the awkward moment when I hit and we all disappear at the same time. So we'll do that. Any other thoughts or anything you'd like to share, Seth, before we go?
No, I want to thank everybody who was on this. I think it's really exciting, and I thank you so much for giving me the time. And it was just a wonderful 1 hour of my life.
Well, wonderful for us too. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. And we'll be in touch with more information about Seth's upcoming book. Thank you.
Thank you.